Welcome to The Deep End by On Deck, a podcast where visionary builders, creators, and thinkers discuss world-changing stories and ideas. I'm your host, Marshall Kosloff.
There's these cycles with the media nowadays where things are changing so fast, it's hard for us to really sort of keep up. At the same time, we don't have a fundamental understanding of what's going on with the media. So, you can look at a book and be like, I kind of know how the book works. But, who could look at the Twitter algorithm and tell me how the Twitter algorithm works? Maybe Elon will tell us eventually. But, all of this stuff is very much obscure. And as a result of that, we just don't have good mental models for how do we deal with this? How do we fight back against it? So we are in, I think, a new space. I think things have gotten more complicated. And so when that happens, what naturally happens is you need technological countermeasures.
On Deck is where ambitious people worldwide go to start companies, find their next roles, and invest in their careers. The Deep End invites the founders, operators, and investors from the On Deck community and beyond to turn their experiences into the ideas others need to start their own odysseys. Joining me in the Deep End this week is Fred Stutzman, founder and CEO of Freedom, a company which is developing a tool set for the future of focused work in a distraction-first world. Our discussion is about what the future of work will look like in a world where the very things that enable remote collaboration, like Slack and email, are the very same things which make it hardest to focus. We talk about fighting the negative externalities of social media with tools like Freedom, which blocks distracting websites and apps across your devices. We also discuss how social media creates time displacement and how good work hygiene, creating guardrails, and pre-committing to take advantage of your best intentions can be used to create a better working environment. The conversation also gets into why high-quality work is more mentally taxing in an era of what Fred calls distraction machines, how knowledge work resembles an endurance sport, and how the next generation entering the labor force will relate to the technologies they use at work itself. It's a sobering but eye-opening reminder of the perpetual battle for focus that defines modern work. Let's dive in. Fred Stutzman, welcome to the Deep End.
Thanks for having me on.
Great to chat with you. There's this debate when you're doing an episode like this, whether or not you should ask the founder to tell a personal story about the company origin story, because as you know, oftentimes it's a little hackneyed. Maybe it didn't quite happen that way. But I feel like with this company, the problem you're attacking is when you almost certainly face specifically in your life before the company. So I'd love for you just to tell that story.
Sure. I would be happy to tell the story. I was a graduate student studying social media, and I was studying it, and I was seeing, and this is going back, over 10 years, studying how much time people were spending on social media, what they were creating on social media, just seeing the impact it was having on their lives. And while I was doing this, I was spending a ton of time on social media, and I was justifying it as work. And the problem was, it was wonderful, but I wasn't getting my work done. So the story of Freedom comes from this moment where I was studying social media and I wasn't getting my work done, and I decided to go to this coffee shop. And I would go to this coffee shop because it didn't have Wi-Fi. So this is going back many, many years to where, Wi-Fi wasn't everywhere and you could actually go physical places to get away from the technology. And the place also had great coffee. That's besides the point. But I went there and would get my work done, could focus, could get my dissertation written. And then one day they turned on the Wi-Fi at this place. They put in a router and my strategy started to fail. I could get on Facebook, I could waste my time. And so I said, well, if technology and connectivity is sort of constantly going to be expanding, and we're going to have devices with us that are, just high fidelity and always connected, how are you going to fight back against this encroachment? And so I went home that night and I wrote Freedom, which was a app that that takes you offline. And are you slacking me? Oh, no, sorry. Hold on a second. Sorry, Marshall. I got a Slack message and I thought it was from you, and so I'm turning Slack off.
Yeah, I'm not that crazy. Yeah, ironically enough,
it's like it came in the on deck, and nobody ever Slacks me in on deck. So okay, sorry. Taking it. I'm going to take it back to. I was in the coffee shop. So I was in the okay.
You made the app.
Yeah. So I went home that night and I made the app. And what it did is it took you offline for 45 minutes at a time. You just pressed a button and it took you offline and allowed you to focus. Basically, put you on an airplane or put you in a coffee shop without Wi-Fi so you could get your work done. And so that's kind of the story of where it all started. And here we are all these years later, still working on it.
Yeah, I want to start with your academic background, actually, because 10 years ago, the social media space then, social media space now, what did the distraction space look like? Because this is going to be a bit of a TBT for most listeners. If I think of 10 years ago, my issue would have been Facebook, not Instagram, definitely not TikTok on two different levels. But yeah, what did that picture look like for you?
Yeah, it was different yet similar in many ways. So when we looked at the behavior of college students that were using social media, the main thing we saw was this tremendous amount of time displacement around the time that they were spending on social media. So it was clear that sites like Facebook, and I mean even before then, if you remember going way back, MySpace. There were early social media sites, but we've seen sort of the same thing again and again, which is just people displacing their time that they would ordinarily spend doing other things on social media. And so what we studied was Facebook. We looked at how Facebook was exploding across college campuses in the beginning of sort of Facebook's growth and its takeoff. And it just came back to again and again, people were checking in constantly. People were spending hours a day. They were using their computers to do it. I mean, this was before the phone, and we just had never seen anything like that before. To be honest, like we hadn't seen that. The only thing we could really compare it to was like the time you spend watching TV. But it's like people were picking up a whole other habit of watching 2 more hours of TV a day, and that was hugely impactful to their lives. And there are pros and cons, obviously. But for the researchers and certainly for the people who are developing the software, there was just this lightning moment of, holy cow, this is huge. We've never seen anything like this before, and we need to understand more.
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear that there are millions of people using Freedom. I'm curious about the various eras of consumer adoption, because I personally, to over-personalize this for a second, but I feel like most people this is going to resonate. I feel as if my time displacement, I like using that phrase, became so much of a bigger issue as the COVID lockdown started and work from home started. So you just do not have a boss who could look over your shoulder. You are usually using your personal computer. So this isn't as if you're browsing on the desktop or laptop provided by work. What were the different, so that's one specific era. What have you just found in terms of the specific challenges facing actual users during these periods?
Yeah, and I'll say a little bit about what Freedom is, and that will help inform the discussion. So Freedom, like I said, we started out as this. Well, I started out as a little app that takes you offline, and for many years we were just that. I started Freedom as a nights and weekends project as I was in graduate school, and then I was a professor and teaching and researching social media. And really trying to prevent it from taking over my life, the company that is. Eventually, the company grew. People wanted more features. They wanted to have support for more platforms. And we said, okay, there's a real opportunity here. People want to sort of fight back against technology. So let's build out a platform that allows them to do that. So we made basically a version of our app that works on all devices, laptops, phones, tablets, computers, what have you. And so we made that app in kind of 2015, 2016, launched it. And we saw it grow for many years. And but when the lockdowns hit, it was just, things obviously went in a much different direction. We saw the hockey stick. We saw everything take off. And so I think about that time, and it's interesting. So we had developed all these, social media tools or media tools that we're just using as part of our everyday lives. And then we're faced with what I think of as an information crisis. So the lockdown is this novel situation that many of us, almost all of us, have not ever been a part of. And getting the right information about how you behave is going to impact your life in a way, it could save your life. So people were just trained to, I need to constantly check. I need to know what's going on in my city. I need to know how to deal with this. And then you've got this loop of, checking the media, checking social media, and it absolutely takes over our lives. At the same time, we're thrust into, hey, you need to go and figure out how you're going to work from home, how you're going to basically be as productive as you were before. And all of these technologies come together in one. So, I'm keeping track of what's going on with the pandemic. In another tab, I'm trying to, work on my Google Docs. And so for us, this was this very aha moment of the future of work is having an environment that allows you to focus on the things that you need to focus on and turn the distractions off. And, one of the big learnings from, all the people who've used Freedom in the last 3-4 years is that for the most part, the world doesn't stop when you turn off the distractions. They'll be there, and you can develop good hygiene around how you check in. And it's important to check in. We're not anti-social media. We're not anti-media in general. It's just we need to have balance, and we need to have some tools to help compartmentalize that a little bit. And so, it's really been just a period of incredible insight that was something that was shocking and surprising to us.
I also like the phrase good hygiene. So in our non-work lives, good hygiene is, wash your hands after you go to the bathroom, brush your teeth 2 to 3 times a day. What does good hygiene look like in this always on connected workplace context?
It's really challenging, and it requires at this point it requires a lot of stepping back. It is really challenging, and it requires at this point a lot of self-motivation, and that's not something that all of us have at this point. And kind of what do I mean by this is, we're working on these devices that are both personal and business devices. This idea of like the business computer, or the person. It's our lives are all intertwined at this point in time. At the same point, the companies that are producing the distractions are using the best behavioral knowledge. They've got PhDs who work on these questions. What are we going to do to maximize the time on screen? What are we going to do to maximize people's engagement with these tools? And so you've got this kind of war going on where people are fighting for your attention, and you only have so many hours of attention a day. And so we have this kind of naive approach, which is like, I just need to figure out ways to cope with this. I need to get a bigger brain. I need to get more self-motivation. And that is really, really hard. That is incredibly hard. And it's not something that's natural to us. And it's not something that's sort of fair in the sense that we have the same amount of skills that these technology companies do in terms of competing for our attention. And so as we step back and we think about it, there's really a space for technology to enable you to create the environments that you are going to be the most successful in. And those are environments that have good hygiene. And so, when you think about, to your question in particular, there are things that you can do, that certainly, using something like Freedom, where you schedule and compartmentalize your day and say, these are my work times, these are the times that I'm going to be scrolling, these are the times that, if you can say, here's how I want to spend my time, that's very powerful. Obviously, you can also do things simple as deleting social media from your devices. And I say that, personally, I carry around a phone, and I don't put social media on that phone. The reason being, I know if I have it on my phone, I'm just going to check it. It's going to take over my life. It's going to take over my time. And so I have certain devices that I'll just use to check in on social media. That's not something that everybody can do. We don't always have multiple devices, but there's a lot of small things and big things we can do to have that good hygiene. But the challenge is it requires a lot of work to set it up, and it requires a lot of motivation, and it's not something that comes natural to us.
What's interesting here is I'm curious, how much motivation and self-discipline do you think is required to use Freedom properly? Because part of the issue that I'm sure most folks run into, I'm very motivated to fix my browsing productivity habits. I'm sure this is kind of a bit of a tangent, but I'm sure you have that experience of actually sitting down and thinking about your day. And you were like, wait a second, I had so much time to prep to do this episode with you. And that's exciting. But then you also realize I also spent 45 minutes watching YouTube trailers after the new Thor trailer came out. Yeah. And I got stuck down the rabbit hole. So I have the motivation, but I don't quite have the discipline there. So can you talk about how users find that difficult dynamic?
That really is the ultimate question. If we can solve that discipline problem, then, we've unlocked a lot. But it's very natural. So, when you step back and you think about anything in your life, it's easy to imagine yourself working out. It's easy to imagine yourself having that salad for dinner instead of, it's easy to be our best selves in our minds, but when it comes to actually doing it, it's really, really challenging. And so scoping back to Freedom in particular, we have the same problem as well. There's lots of people who are like, I want to be really productive tomorrow, but when it comes down to it, you get off the first meeting of the day, you lose 30 minutes, checking email or checking social media. The ways that we found that work for people are trying to leverage your best intentions beforehand. And generally, you can do that by scheduling, by pre-committing. And so the nice thing about Freedom is you can say, hey, tomorrow lock me offline or lock me off of social media from 9 to noon. And it'll do it because it's a technology. It'd be really nice if you could say, okay, make me work out from 9 to 10. But we don't have that technology yet. But we can actually create these guardrails. And people find that when you sort of take that motivation and then you apply it, it creates a virtuous cycle. So you do this a couple of times and you start to see the connections. And I think that's another big challenge / opportunity for Freedom users is sort of having it revealed number one, if I go away from social media for a few hours, the world mostly stays the same. It doesn't end. And I can, the time I spent, that I would have spent checking things during that work block, I can do that check in 10 minutes and get back to work. They also notice that it is a lot less mentally fatiguing. So when you are trying to focus on a task, but your attention is also being taken away by, the tab or the phone app that's competing for your attention, you're just not doing as high quality work. And so when you can really focus in and get that high quality work done without distractions competing for attention, you just do better work, and it is a lot less mentally taxing. And then, there's just this realization that comes with, kind of like anything in life. You go work out a few times. Yeah, the first couple times suck. But then you realize, it's not that bad. I'm in a routine. Work is like that as well. And I think that's one of the things that we're trying to help people understand. We have the saying inside the company that work is sort of like an endurance sport. It is not something that you just are going to be good at from day one. You need to work at it. You need to develop skills, and you need to use technology to help you, to enable you. And I think when you put all those things together, you really can fight back against that natural urge that's just natural to all of us, where it's hard to have that motivation.
It's interesting. We're kind of amorphously referring to tabs, social media, YouTube, right? So those three different examples, those are actually three different internet-driven functions. Just from your experience and from the user experience side, can you shine any light on what type of behavior is going to be the most pernicious? Like, obviously, you cannot. I think everyone knows by now that multitasking isn't a thing, quote unquote. But there's got to be gradations of. I could put on synthwave music on YouTube and be productive. So how do you think about that?
Yeah, so stepping back to the social media research, the thing that was so telling and what was such a major component of the time that people were spending online was the fact that somebody they knew was on the other side of the device. It was a connection to a person, whether they knew them in person or not, they were part of their community, and it creates that social obligation. So that's one of the things that is so powerful, yet also so terribly distracting about social media. And let's scope social media out to even be things like email. Anything where you've got somebody who is sitting and waiting for your response or putting things on your to-do list or creating an agenda, it's just so natural for you to go back and say, I should go check that. I don't want to let that person down. At the same time, we think about so many of the tools that have enabled remote work, that have enabled the work that we've done over the past couple of years. They're like synchronous communication tools, Slack, Teams. We've built these tools that have enabled this work, but they are distraction machines. That's the only way you can describe them. And so we're in this weird state where we're like patting ourselves on the back for doing this great work with Slack and with Teams and all these sort of tech-enabled, high fidelity, interactive tools. But all of them are competing for our attention, and all of them are distracting from focus. When we sit down and we think about just the best work, there's a couple of things that are in common. One of them is it's monotasked and focused. And so the more that we can turn off these interpersonal distractions, the more that we can turn off the tabs that are easily switched to that compete for attention, the better you're going to do in focusing and staying away from that multitask situation. But it's really, really hard. It requires, not just technology, but sort of also knowing what the problems are. So when we think about, how people deal with these distractions, oftentimes we say, sit down and do an audit. Say, keep track of where you spent your time in the last couple hours. Use a time tracking tool. You can use a notebook. Think about where you switched to. Think about the things, when you were doing really good work, and then what pulled you off of that work. And so in doing that kind of exercise, you can get a better sense of what are your personal distractions. From there, you can build a list of, okay, here are the things I'm not going to go to, or here are the things I'm going to block. Lots of tools and technologies that can support that. But it is really personal. And I mean, when we talk to our users, it's everything from social media to the news to sports to, you name it. I mean, there's enough freedom users out there that everybody's got a different distraction. But, the key thing is when we look at all of them, they sit down and say, this is something that is keeping me from achieving my goals. And, for most of us, it's this goal of this very simple goal of let's do good work. That is so many of us are driven by. And this stuff just kind of steps in the middle of that process.
Yeah. So Another meta question for you that comes to mind when we're talking about teams, workplace tools. How do you, as a founder, structure your company? Do you have Slack? Are you using Teams? Is it remote? Is it in person? How have you answered these broad structural questions?
Yeah, it's a learning process for us. It's a learning process for a lot of companies. Our company is remote. We've been remote since 2015. We're headquartered in the United States with a number of employees here, and then we have employees in Europe from UK, and then we all the way over to Georgia, and so we've got people kind of all over the globe. And because of that, we've got time shifts and all the challenges of asynchrony that we have to deal with. We do use Slack. We do use Slack for interpersonal communication primarily. So it's kind of interesting, and not to go on too much of a tangent, but what we've looked at these companies that are remote that sort of place a ton of emphasis on in-person meetings and a lot of video, and we kind of look at them and we don't quite get it. And the reason being is a lot of, or most of the employees, sort of in my cohort and in cohorts around us, we've grown up using chat culture. We have done a lot of our interpersonal communication with chat for 20, 30 years. And of course, when you look at the Gen Z and people who are entering the workforce now, these are chat native individuals. And so we don't look at chat as kind of a secondary form of communication. We look at it as a primary form of communication. And we use it to build our culture. So we look at Slack as the water cooler almost. We do run a lot of stuff through Slack. We've got a lot of notifications and things like that, but we don't try and project manage through Slack. We don't try and run the important work through Slack. We have project management systems that serve that purpose, and they work pretty well. They're designed for asynchrony. We're happy with them. But we look at Slack as, here's a way to build the company, here's a way to build the culture. And we've seen that chat culture emerge and be very successful. And I think that's, just again, a meta point, something a lot of companies are maybe not thinking about as much. Like this, we think of it as this secondary mode of communication, but chat, it's a very primary mode of communication. And it's certainly a primary mode of communication for, those of us who are spending a lot of time on our devices. And you can build real trusted relationships through chat and all of that. So, so we really believe in segmenting kind of the work and the interpersonal. And it's worked well. We do have some degree of it. Every day we have a stand up, like many companies, and we bring people together. But having that sort of mindful separation has been really good for us, and I think has been good for the team.
Another question that comes to mind is, how do you think about another broader issue, which is just this always on, always reachable idea? Because something that I desperately miss pre-COVID was just the ability to, and you never truly clock out, but operationally clock out. For a minimum, you had an hour and a half for your commute. This is a underappreciated benefit of the morning and night commute that a lot of folks are realizing they miss more and more. So how do you just think about that broadly? Because that's a management expectations issue. Mm-hmm. You can use freedom to 110%, but there's still this broader, I don't want to say existential dread, but I'll basically hint at existential dread experience people have. What do you just think about that?
It is a very big and real question, and it's one we struggle with. It's maybe exacerbated when you've got people working across time zones. As a founder, the first person in the company, and I've seen it grow to the 25 people we are now. Every step of the way, I've been like, I need to be at the middle of this. I need to, or it just so happens that way. And as a result of that, you are just constantly on. You're always connected. You always want to be there. And I mean, for a lot of founders, I think that's natural. I mean, you're just so excited that I've got all these people who have bought into my vision of the world and are working with me on this project. That is there's no bigger blessing. That is incredible. And so you're just naturally like, I want to be there. I want to support them. But there's only so many hours a day, and you've got to take care of your personal life. You've got to do all those things. So it's a really hard question. How to solve it? I think the pandemic has made things more challenging because you're right. There's less of the morning commute. There's less of the forced time away, where you just were forced to be on the subway alone with your thoughts, in a podcast or in the car, and those are really, really nice things. And the data supports it. Microsoft had some really interesting research they just released about the rise of the triple peak day, where, we're now seeing people working 3 times a day. And that third time is at 10 o'clock at night when people come back in and check email.
What are the first two?
Oh, it's morning and afternoon. And then the third peak is the night, so. I've
been doing that.
Totally.
I feel that. Yeah.
Totally. We're all doing it. And so, I'm like not answering your question, because the question is how do we deal with this, the always on? I think in our team, we've just got expectations around asynchrony that allow people to work when they work and detach when they detach. And we've got processes that are resilient to that. And I think that's kind of what you can do. You can create a company where the velocity and the management expectations are you are going to be working at disjointed times, and we don't need to be in the situation where everybody is overlapping all the time. And if you do that, you're going to be able to let people detach a little bit. The second thing is forced detachment. So one of the things we do in the company, we don't do this completely, but we do a partial 4-day work week. So for some weeks of the year, we work a 4-day week and specifically have that Friday off, where we give the team the day off and everybody puts the work down and they have a 3-day weekend. It's incredibly popular, and I see the world kind of moving towards that slowly, those kind of things can really at least create some of the downtime and force it if people aren't going to take it. But it's hard. It's hard as a startup to take some of those things. But the reality is, we've learned, we're running a marathon. We're not running a sprint. And to run the marathon, to go back to the endurance metaphor, you need to have people who can focus, who can work on the long term. And I think the only way you do that is by having good work-life balance. But these things are very much, the challenges that we're all wrestling with today, and we don't have easy solutions for them.
So I have one question about the more academic-y side of this, and then one outward-facing one about freedom and where it goes next. I'll start with the academic-y one. Do you ever think about how much is this time actually different issue, in the sense that, and this goes around Twitter every few months, the article from Victorian Britain where people are talking about the scourge of penny novels, how it's distracting everybody. And I'm sure it was distracting. And, television comes about and you get home VCRs. Is there something unprecedented about the level of distraction that folks are experiencing in the workplace, aside from just, back in the 1400s, Marshall would have been sitting in a nice little, abbey writing lengthy Latin tomes, versus the version of me today who's struggling to prep for podcasts. So yeah, what do you think about that issue?
So that was the history repeats itself narrative was one of the, was one of the favorite things that I ran into in graduate school when I started studying the adoption of technologies. So, if we look back at every technology, the phone, the television, the radio, the book, there's always these hysterias around how it's going to change society, and what it's going to displace. And you're right. Like, even going back to the invention of the book, you can find people who are like, people are going to spend too much time on books. Like, oh man, they're not going to be out, running and getting vigor. They're going to be reading too much. And it's like, now, what would you do to like have a kid who spends too much time on a book instead of an iPad? But there are these narratives around all of these technologies, and they repeat. And we have very predictably seen all of these narratives emerge around technology, and then all the like things within technology, social media, and even email. I mean, we've seen it again and again. But what is new and what is different? I do think there is something new, novel, and different here. And maybe we'll go back to like the television is like when things really kind of change, because the type of media that we're able to consume, like I think our brains are not evolving as fast as the technology is evolving. Marshall McLuhan talks about hot media and cold media, and the media in our phones is so very hot. It's so appealing. It draws us in, and it is really something that we've seen. Everything being analyzable, everything being sort of actionable, all of the things that people can then tweak to make it more addicting, make it more appealing. And so there's these cycles with the media nowadays where things are changing so fast, it's hard for us to really sort of keep up. At the same time, we don't have a fundamental understanding of like what's going on with the media. So, I mean, you can look at a book and be like, I kind of know how the book works. But I mean, who could look at the Twitter algorithm and tell me how the Twitter algorithm works? Like maybe Elon will tell us eventually. But, all of this stuff is very much obscure. And as a result of that, we just don't have good mental models for like, how do we deal with this? How do we like fight back against it? So we are in, I think, a new space. I think things have gotten more complicated. And so, when that happens, what naturally happens is you need technological countermeasures, and freedom is one of them. And I think we'll see more. And I mean, it's interesting going back to like when we were first pitching the idea of freedom, people laughed us out of the room. They said, software that turns off stuff, like people can just turn it off themselves. But the reality is, well, number one, that's hard. Number two, people don't. And number three, how would you even begin to like start solving these problems? So naturally, technology can help, but it can't just be technology. It has to be education. It has to be giving people awareness. There's a whole set of behaviors that need to change for people to really grapple with the problems that technology's created.
You're using a slightly depressing way of describing this issue when you say fight back. That's very adversarial.
Yep.
When it comes to technology, it's not symbiotic. It's not. No worries. All you have to do is like, can you explain? And maybe it's just like and once again, I don't want to overread into metaphors, but it just seems like very hostile.
Yep.
And that's worrying.
Yeah, it is. And it's not just marketing speak. I promise you. When I studied social media, I did my PhD on how people use social media during a life transition and how they used it in a positive way. So I've always been very positive on media technologies, and I've been very positive on the impacts that it can have in our lives. And I still am. I still think that there's a lot of good that can be done with media, and social media in particular. But I have looked at what these tools can do in terms of affecting social change, in terms of the data collection, in terms of the adversarial way they treat users. And I do see it as a fight. I do see it as something where we need tools that at least give us a little bit of a fight back against these tools that we're expected to use. Is that depressing? I think I like to think of it as just enabling people to be more conscious around how they're spending their time and what they're spending their time on. And, tools like Freedom can help with that. But they have to realize, and we've seen this, that, when you enter, when you start using these tools, when you start using social media, and when you're using it in your daily life, you're giving them so much information which can be used against you. And so it's this very unfair playing field. It is a fight.
Speaking of fights then, so for the final question, I'd love to hear just where Freedom goes next. This is an On Deck podcast. You did it on Deck Scale. So obviously you're focused on that aspect of it. This is once again, to your last answer, depressing, optimistic, depending on your perspective, an infinite fight. There's infinite space. There's far more than than the millions of users you have now. Like that number could get, like your total addressable market here is insanely large. From a certain perspective, you could make a sort of ridiculous looking slide deck, I'm sure. So just talk about your experience scaling and then what the future really looks like for you.
Right. Yeah. It is one of these things where, we think that everybody who's got Instagram on their phone should have Freedom on their phone. So the market is large.
Quick thing, the gnome thing where it's like gnomes, and they have a in between stage. Then the answer is profit. For you, it's like people own Instagram. People have Instagram. They have iPhones. X. It's blank. Profit. So whatever that X thing is.
Exactly. So I was kind of alluding to this in an earlier answer. We have built the technology to turn off the distractions. And that was a complex multi-year project. This stuff is not easy. And it took us really sort of investing in and building out the space where we could do this and do this well. And at the same time, we listened to thousands of users. We've surveyed and researched and studied. And what we came back to is these distractions are individual, and this is a holistic problem. So it is not one that is purely solved with technology. It is solved by giving you insight into your behaviors and creating incentives for you to change your behavior in a positive way. And so we look at Freedom right now at the beginning, as the beginning of our next major stage of growth. And what we're going to focus in on is creating the environments for people to succeed. What I mean by that is, if you want to achieve your work goals, you've got to understand how you're going to spend your time and allocate your time. You're going to need to develop the skills to do so. And Freedom is going to step in to help you allocate your time wisely and to have time for focused work. We really believe that the future of work is creating the environments of success. And so to do that, you need to have control of your distractions. You need to have your time to monofocus, to monotask, and you need to do deep focused work. And so we're very focused in on creating that. And, we think our market is tremendous. We think it's, every student, every worker, and we think everybody should be enabled with this kind of technology. And I think we look a couple of years down the road, we'll see it. And so, in scale, it's been a really interesting process for us. We've largely grown organically and through the bootstrap. Some of that was just things grew so fast during the pandemic that we just could really only focus on scaling out and growing our company and supporting our users. And now we're really looking forward to the next phase of growth, and being in scale has been really helpful to connect with founders and explore what the market's like and really build our company for the next stage. And so we're really excited about it, and it's a really exciting time.
Excellent. Well, best of luck with that, Fred. You've unironically earned a customer today. Because something I just want to editorialize for a second, because what I appreciate about what you're describing here is that we all have a lot of project management and project organization applications, all those different bits. And I think, for example, Asana is great. I use it at work, but oftentimes it actually becomes a distraction / other function of itself. So there's the Asana tax, there's the Asana task. The tax wasn't too much of a Freudian slip. But there's a project, then there's inbox messages about the project, and there's also a Slack about the same project. So to your point, I think there is an additional space beyond just organizing work. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of energy in that space, and that's very useful. But I think there is something, to your point, around actually enabling you to do something in that space. Because like sometimes I'll find myself actively overwhelmed by my organization process, which is the opposite of what should be happening, obviously.
Yeah. No, I've spent a lot of my days trying to develop the most efficient organization process and not actually getting the work done. It's it's absolutely the truth. I mean, there's just a natural focus on things that can be quantified, and like project management software is quantifiable. Work and knowledge work is harder to quantify. Mm-hmm. Cal Newport writes about this pretty extensively. All the models of like quantifying knowledge work are really based on like 70s and 80s era studies, and we just don't have great ways to know if we're doing knowledge work better. And so I think, there's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem, but if you look at like try and do work without freedom, try and do work with freedom. And it doesn't have to be freedom. It could be just turn off your internet and like write, it doesn't have to be our app, but do that and just feel the qualitative difference. And it's remarkable when you really can engage in focus, and you just get work done. You feel good about yourself. It's a lot less stressful and a lot less sort of personally taxing, and you're just setting yourself up for success. And so I think if as we figure out how to quantify these measures of if you turn off and you focus, people are going to get X amount more work done. It's going to really sort of help our narrative. But the proof has been in the pudding of millions of people who've used it and have been like, yeah, this is life-changing. And it's been really exciting to see that. But yeah, I'm interested in this space because it is, I think the biggest question in technology, and certainly the biggest question in like individual or work technology is how do we enable knowledge workers or students or really anybody who just needs to like get stuff done on their devices to do that in a more efficient and reliable way. Not so that they necessarily can just do more work. It's that maybe they can actually get more done in
add value.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's just so many positive things that come out of solving this problem that I'm like, okay, this is what I'm going to do for my life's work. So, but I'm cool with that.
Awesome. Well, Fred, thank you so much for joining us on The Deep End.
Oh, thanks for having me. What a great conversation.